Hi, everybody. So today's notes are going to be about section 5.6, and our goal for today is to connect vertical and horizontal lines with inequalities. So we already know how to graph vertical and horizontal lines, and we already know how to graph inequalities, and we're just going to be connecting those two things today. So let's review graphing a vertical line. When I look at this first equation, I know that this should be a vertical line because if my variable is x, then this should be a vertical line. Now, this is going to be a vertical line where the x value is 4. So on the x-axis, I'm going to find the number 4, and I'm going to draw a vertical line in that spot on the graph. I also know that if my equation says y equals 4, then if the variable is a y, then this should be a horizontal line. So I'm going to find the spot on the graph where the y is 4, which would be here, and I'm going to draw a horizontal line through that point. You could always make a table. So one option that you have here as kind of a backup plan if you ever get stuck is you could make a table of values for this problem where all of the x's are 4 and the y's can be whatever numbers you want. And this is kind of a backup plan. If you don't remember which one is vertical and which one is horizontal, by graphing these points, 4, -1, 4, 0, and 4, 1, you can picture that vertical line. The same thing with a horizontal line. As a backup plan, you could always make a table of values where all of the y values are a 4 and all of the x values are -1, 0, and 1. So we would have this point, and this point, and by graphing those, you can visualize that this would be a horizontal line as sort of option number 2 for figuring out these graphs. So our question of the day is, how do we graph inequalities with vertical lines? So if we're going to graph several vertical lines in a row, and what we're going to focus on now is how does having an inequality instead of an equal to change the way we make the graph? So for this problem right here where it says x is less than 4, I know that this should be a vertical line on the number 4. It should look just like this graph right here, only I'm going to make this a dotted line because now I have a less than, which means I use a dotted line on my graph. So what's going to change first is that this is going to be a dotted line. Now, the next thing that's going to change is that I need to shade. Now, normally, when we graph on a graph like this, we would shade above or shade below the line. But when a line is vertical, you cannot shade above. The arrow means it keeps going up forever, so there's no way to be above that line. And you cannot shade below because the arrow means it's going down forever. So if we think about where the x's on this graph go less than the number 4, the x's that are less than 4 would be like 3, 2, 1, 0, -1, -2, etc. Instead of shading above or below, this is the only time on a graph that has two dimensions, x's and y's, that this time we're going to shade left. So I would shade to the left, which is right over here. For the next graph, it's going to be the same dotted line. So I'm going to have a dotted line on the number 4. And the reason I'm using a dotted line is that there's no equal to underneath the little symbol here. But this time, since it's a greater than symbol, I'm going to shade to the right. Just like the other time I shaded to the left, this time I'm going to shade to the right. So I'm still going to use a dotted line, but this time I'm going to shade right. Now let's look at what changes if we do have an equal to symbol. So the first change is going to be that instead of using a dotted line, I'm going to use a solid line. And instead of shading to the right, because this is a less than, I'm going to shade to the left. For the last problem, I'm going to make a solid line again because there is an equal to. But this time, because there's a greater than, I'm going to shade to the right. Now let's talk about horizontal lines. So our next question is going to be, how do we graph inequalities with horizontal lines? The first thing I know is that this line is going to be horizontal because anytime the variable is a y, it's going to be a horizontal line. So on this graph, I'm going to find the y value of 4, and I'm going to make a horizontal line there. Now, since this is a less than and there's no equal to symbol, I'm going to make this a dotted horizontal line because there's no equal to. Because this is a less than, I'm going to shade below the line. So we can go back to what we've always done, which is that shading can be above or below. In this case, it's going to be below because it's a less than. For the next problem, I would still have a horizontal line and it would still be dotted because there's no equal to symbol. But this time I'm going to shade above the line because this time instead of a less than, it would be a greater than. For the next problem, I would make a solid line because this time there is an equal to symbol. And this time, since there's a less than, I would shade below the line. Finally, for the last problem, because there's an equal to symbol, I would use a solid line. But because there's a greater than, I would shade above. Okay, thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate you paying attention and taking good notes, and I will see you for some practice.